So, you'd like to get into high-power rocketry. How do you do it? Well, to get a high-power rocket motor in the first place, you need certifications, so let's start there. Rocket motors are ranked in letter classes by their impulse, from fractions of an A to the largest of O's. Or, those are what you can get commercially, anyway.
Fire.
Without a certification, you can get up to most G rocket motors. If you get a level 1 certification, you get access to H and I rocket motors. With level 2, you get J, K, and L, and with level 3, you get M, N, and O. To gain a level 1 or 2 certification, broadly speaking, you need to fly a rocket successfully with the class of motor you're trying to certify for. For example, if you'd like a level 1 certification, you need to fly an H or I rocket motor and recover the rocket successfully. Someone who is already certified will observe your flight, sign off on it, and determine if the flight met all qualifications. Okay, so for me to get into high-power rocketry, it sounds simple enough. I need to build a rocket, fly it on an H or I rocket motor, and have the rocket return in an undamaged state. Preferably in a known location. Unlike last time. As all rocket projects do, I started playing around in OpenRocket. OpenRocket is a design and simulation software that helps people design their model rockets. It tells you how much it should weigh, how high it will go, how fast it will go, how far away it should land given your inputted winds, but more importantly, how stable your rocket is. For a rocket to be stable, and we won't get too into the weeds here, the center of pressure needs to be behind the center of mass. This is as such that as it tips over, the surface area on the fins increases, inducing a corrective force. For the size of the rocket, I knew I wanted it to be bigger than the last one, but still small enough to be easily transportable and manageable. I settled on a 54mm diameter cardboard airframe, entirely based on vibes. I also settled on a 29mm cardboard motor mount tube, also entirely based on vibes. Some of you may notice that 54mm is bigger than 29mm, so we need to center and support the motor mount tube inside the rocket. And that's where centering rings come in. As the name implies, one tube goes inside the other, which centers it inside the rocket. They also secure it into the airframe when you use epoxy or glue to mount them in place. In order to manufacture these, I ordered 12mm thick plywood birchwood, and I also picked up 3mm plywood birchwood for the fins. A little note here is that they do not need to be that thick at all. In fact, I could have used the same 3mm thick plywood as I did for the fins, and they would have been fine. I wanted to increase the weight of the rocket to reduce our apogee a little bit, but there are way easier ways to do this. Regardless, I 3D printed the shape of the rings and fins and stenciled them out on the relevant wood. I then took it to a bandsaw where I freehand cut all the parts, and I think they came out quite nicely. Next, assembly. The best way to build the rocket is from the inside out, starting from the motor tube. Since there's a gap between the airframe and the motor tube, we can actually make the fins reach inside the airframe with what's called a fin tab. This means the fins can be mounted in multiple locations to the rocket, and it can also help with alignment. I marked out where the centering rings need to go and used a small amount of super glue or CA to hold them in place. I also 3D printed a fin alignment tool and also used a small amount of CA to secure the fins in place temporarily. That evening, I took the assembly to a well-ventilated area to cement it in place with epoxy. This process was pretty easy as it was just mixing up some epoxy, in this case JB Weld 5-minute, pouring it into the slot between the centering rings and the fins, letting it partially cure, and then rotating it to do the next slot until all four were done. After cutting some slots in the airframe for fins, we can slide the tube over and again use a small amount of CA to hold it in place. I then masked off where I didn't want epoxy and mated the airframe and the motor tube assembly with more epoxy. In order to secure their joints, I used some wonderful fillets. Fillets. They're called fillets. I like rage baiting people with that. All a fillet is a curved mate between two surfaces. In order to do this, I put the epoxy where the fin meets the body tube and used a curved surface to pull it into a nice, gentle, uniform shape. And another note, while it worked out fine, I would not recommend using clear epoxy for this, as in practice it made it really hard to see where the epoxy was and where it was not, especially when wet. After taking the time to do all four sides, I mixed up a little bit of epoxy to mount on two 1010 aluminum rail guides that I had 3D printed out of ABS. There are plenty of ways to make sure these are aligned to make sure the rocket goes on and off the rail smoothly. However, I completely eyeballed it. And with all that complete, that is a completed booster section. For the forward section, I picked up a 54mm plastic nose cone and used a screw through the wall of the airframe and nose to mount it to the top of the airframe. I also used a smaller tube to act as a coupler section between the booster and upper section. I also, like the last rocket, 3D printed a camera mount, almost the same design, just a little bit bigger, to fit a camera. I cut the hole through the airframe for the camera to see out and secured the entire assembly with a couple of 3.5mm screws. All that was left was a coat of paint, so it got the signature so far for the Moroaicǎ series, a silver body with gray accents. The accents for this were the fin section, the nose, and a stripe above where it separates. The last part was the recovery system, which was actually quite simple. Most rocket motors, aside from some larger ones, have what's called an ejection charge. There's a slow-burning compound above the rocket propellant in the motor that burns slowly at a known rate. After the motor burns out, this compound slowly burns through, and once it does, it ignites a reservoir of black powder at the top, pressurizing the inside of the rocket with hot gas and usually pushing it apart and pulling out your recovery system for a nice gentle ride to the ground. The H195 rocket motor I purchased to attempt this certification with comes with a 14-second delay. Our open rocket simulation shows that we only need an 11-second coast, so we need to trim off 3 seconds with a drill. If we've timed it right as we hit apogee, the delay grain should burn through, ignite the black powder, blow the rocket apart, and inflate the parachute, giving us a nice ride to the ground. We also include a red Nomex blanket since the gas is very hot and sometimes has burning pieces of black powder in it to protect the parachute from getting burnt or getting holes in it. As nerve-wracking as it felt, there was nothing left to do but fly. You know how Rocket Lab and other space companies like to give their missions cheeky little puns in the naming? Well, I didn't touch on it in the video, but Moroaicǎ 0, the first scratch-built rocket I made, flew on a flight named Borderline, named after a song by my favorite musical artist, Tame Impala. It was a little joke about how the rocket was flying on the largest rocket motor I could without needing a certification, practically being on the borderline of what I could fly. This flight was no different, sporting the name Let It Happen after a song by the same artist. This was a nod to me, hoping my first venture into high-power rocketry and my certification would happen. I also started doing some branding, pulling all of my rocket projects into something called Phantom Aerospace. Now, it's not an official space company or anything, but I just thought it sounded cool. I made this logo, and no, it's not the ghost from Pac-Man, though they look similar. I actually made them myself, and while the art is not the best in the world, I'm actually kind of proud of how it turned out. We also bear the motto Alta Patamus, or roughly to seek higher things. I'm aware it should actually be Altus Patamus. However, a university already has that name, and I'm taking no chances here. I am no Saul Goodman. With that out of the way, it's time to pack up for launch. I hit the road decently early in the morning to a deceptively beautiful sunrise. Upon approaching the launch site, an overcast had developed. Since you cannot launch through clouds, I was worried that the clouds would impact our attempt at flight and push it later into the day. However, the clouds ended up being much higher than I intended to fly. Once I arrived at Mini Midwest Power, hosted by the Quad Cities Rocketry Club, I found my certifier, got my flight card, and did all the paperwork necessary before I could fly. With the paperwork out of the way, it's time to get ready to fly. I powered on the camera, put it in its mount, and secured it inside the airframe. I put some stickers of my logo and a custom mission patch I had made for the flight in the space above the camera mount, and then put the nose cone on and secured it with the screw. I took the rocket apart to pack the parachute just a little bit tighter and also to check if the fit between the sections was good. It needs to be loose enough to separate when the rocket is pressurized, but not too loose that it falls out on its own. If the drag on the bottom of your rocket is actually higher than on the top of your rocket and your connection is too loose, it can actually pull apart in flight, deploying your chute and causing you to reach a much lower altitude than intended. Once I was ready, I inserted the motor and headed out to the pad. Once at the pad with the rocket signed off on, I slid the rocket onto the rail, raised it vertical, and installed the igniter into the rocket, hoping that it would not take 3 tries like last time. After a couple of flights on adjacent rails, the announcer read out my rocket, counted down, pressed the button, and my rocket disappeared. I mean, look, it's a gray and silver rocket on a gray and silver sky, and it's not that big, and it also pulled 30 Gs off the rails, so any chance of seeing it was non-existent. After scanning the sky, nothing was seen, no chute was spotted, and the brief joy of seeing it lift off was in fact gone. Quickly assembling a team, we combed through all adjacent fields in a grid pattern, confident that with the low winds of that day, we should have landed within a few hundred feet. We searched all directions and came up empty-handed. Editor Olivia back here, it was, I don't know if you can pick up on the sarcasm, but it was not a couple hundred feet. It was not a couple hundred feet. Thankfully, though, the rest of the day actually went quite good, sitting with family and friends, watching plenty of other people fly their rockets. Driving home sucked, though. I'd lost 2 rockets in the exact same way. There is no actual god way that happened. The very next weekend, while sitting in an Applebee's after having just graduated from high school moments prior, I checked my phone and noticed I had an alarming amount of Discord messages. Now, I opened them, seeing as they were from the r/rocketry server. Seeing as I hadn't said anything a while, I was quite confused. Someone had found a rocket and was asking who it belonged to. Someone recognized the rocket from my build thread. It was my rocket. It was intact, looking just as it did when I launched it. Even crazier, the person who had it was my certifier. I actually did do it. I guess the universe let it happen, I suppose. Jokes aside, this was great. The first thing I did was take off the nose cone to check if the stickers were still there, and they were. I now had a couple dozen various stickers to plaster over anything I wanted, and if anyone asked about them, I could say they nearly flew to the speed of sound and went to about 1 kilometer in altitude. More importantly though, we recovered one of these cameras for the first time. Immediately, I took it out of the mount, took out the micro SD card, and plugged it into my computer and literally shrieked when there were files on it. Lots and lots of video files. Taking a look, we can see me setting up the rocket, putting it on the rail and raising it vertical. We can even get close-up views of the rockets from adjacent rails. But alas, liftoff. Now, we can determine a few things. Firstly, the ejection charge was dialed in, separating the vehicle perfectly at apogee. Secondly, the chute took a second to unravel, as we can see and hear the rocket flailing around pretty hard before the orientation and the sound smooths out. And lastly, and perhaps most obviously, we drifted far. I'll throw up a map to help this crazy situation make sense. Keep in mind, this is an estimation based off the video and the winds of that day. We went up and stayed near to the pad before arcing over. Once the chute deployed, we descend slowly from 1 kilometer in altitude, which gave us a lot of time to drift. Plenty of rockets had recovered in the field to the west, but this one was funky. The winds had shifted northwest just as my rocket launched, pushing it this way. Even looking straight up, it would be slightly behind us while we searched the sky. To complicate this more, the rocket descended over a farm located to the northwest and landed behind the buildings and trees from our location, in a field across the road. The camera ran out of storage shortly after touchdown. For what it is worth, it was so close to the road that I am entirely confident I would have seen it, as I had left just that way. What I believe happened, and I have no way of confirming this other than the rocket somehow making it back, is that someone found it and turned it in, which picking up a rocket in the field that it is not yours or you don't have permission to touch is, for the record, against the rules. Regardless, someone must have picked it up, returned it, and any announcement made about it I must have missed, as I was sitting so far away that the announcements were quite hard to hear. I mean, oh well, c'est la vie. I still certed, got my rocket back. Everyone's happy. I mailed off the paperwork to the National Association of Rocketry and am now happily Level 1 certified at the time of making this. Accompanying this video, I will also release a separate video of the full uncut flight footage, along with the music that the flight was named after. So be sure to look out for that. If you liked this video, leave a comment or a like for the sake of engagement. If you really liked this video, I'll leave a link to my Patreon in the description. Any support is welcomed. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.